My name is Rowan Vance. I spent 3 years building the Riverside project from nothing. Every late night, every weekend, every brilliant strategy that turned a failing initiative into a gold mine. That was me. I poured my soul into spreadsheets and presentations, sacrificing dinners with Laurel and sleep I'd never recover. When the board meeting finally arrived, I walked in expecting applause. Instead, I got a slap. My boss, Clyde Mercer, stood at the head of the table, his shark-like grin stretching across his face as he presented my work as his own. Every slide, every figure, every innovative solution, he claimed it all. The board erupted in praise while I sat frozen, watching my promotion slip into his greedy hands. He didn't even glance my way. That evening, Clyde got his corner office and his executive title. I got nothing but a hollow, "good job," and a pat on the shoulder that felt like mockery. Before we continue with this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and smash the like button right now. Also, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. I love hearing from you all. I drove home that night with my knuckles white on the steering wheel, fury and disbelief churning in my gut. But when I opened the door, Laurel was there. My fiancée, my anchor, my beautiful safe haven. She wrapped her arms around me, her jasmine perfume washing over my anger like a balm. We'd been engaged for 8 months, and she was my future, the light at the end of every brutal workday. She'd planned our wedding down to the napkin colors, talked about the house we'd buy, the life we'd built. That night, she held me while I vented about Clyde's betrayal, her fingers running through my hair. "You're too good for that place," she whispered. I believed her. I believed in us. Looking back now, I wonder if she was already planning her exit, if her sympathy was just another performance. But that night, I had no idea the storm brewing behind those green eyes. The whispers started 2 weeks later. I'd catch fragments of conversations that died the moment I entered the break room. Coworkers exchanged loaded glances when I mentioned Laurel. During meetings, I noticed knowing smirks when Clyde's phone buzzed. One afternoon, I overheard Kyle from accounting telling someone, "Yeah, I saw them at Marcello's last Thursday. Definitely not a work dinner." My stomach twisted, but I shoved the paranoia down. Laurel had mentioned having dinner with a client that night. It had to be a coincidence. Clyde was my boss, nothing more. The office gossip mill was vicious and boring, always inventing drama where none existed. I convinced myself I was being ridiculous, that my anger over the promotion was making me imagine conspiracies. But doubt is a persistent thing. It planted roots in my mind, growing tendrils that squeezed tighter each time Laurel came home late or Clyde smiled at me with that insufferable smugness. I worked late on a Tuesday, finishing a proposal Clyde demanded by morning. The office was nearly empty, fluorescent lights humming overhead. I needed Clyde's signature on the budget sheet, so I headed to his office. His door was cracked open, warm lamplight spilling into the hallway. I raised my hand to knock, then froze. Laurel sat perched on his desk, her legs crossed, a glass of red wine dangling from her fingers. She threw her head back laughing at something Clyde said, her hand resting on his shoulder with unmistakable intimacy. The way he looked at her, possessive, hungry, made bile rise in my throat. This wasn't a chance meeting. This was comfortable, familiar. I stood paralyzed, watching my world crack apart. Clyde's hand slid to her knee, and she didn't pull away. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and fled before they could see me. That image burned itself into my brain. Laurel in his space, wearing the dress I'd bought her, sipping wine in the kingdom he'd stolen from me. The axe fell on Friday. Clyde called me into his office with that same predatory smile. "Rowan, we're restructuring the department," he said smoothly, sliding termination papers across his desk. "Your position is being eliminated. We appreciate your contributions." I stared at the documents, numb. The new hire, some fresh-faced kid with an Ivy League degree and zero experience, would take my desk on Monday. As I packed my belongings into a cardboard box, my hands shaking with rage and humiliation, I passed Clyde's office one last time. The door was open, and there, unmistakable and suffocating, was Laurel's jasmine perfume hanging in the air like proof of my stupidity. I'd lost my job, my dignity, and apparently, my fiancée, all to the same man. I drove home in silence, the box of my professional life rattling in the passenger seat, and waited for Laurel to come home so I could demand the truth I already knew. She never came home that night. Instead, a gold-embossed envelope arrived the next morning, hand-delivered by courier. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was an invitation to an engagement party at the Marston Estate, the most exclusive venue in the city. Clyde Mercer and Laurel Greystone requested the pleasure of my company in celebrating their upcoming marriage. I read it 3 times, each word a fresh stab. The party was in 6 weeks. They'd invited everyone from our office, our social circle, people I'd considered friends. The calligraphy was elegant, the paper expensive, the message brutal. They were flaunting it, rubbing my face in their victory like I was nothing, like I'd never existed. I called Laurel. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice light. "I meant to tell you," she said simply. "We're in love, Rowan. You understand." Then she hung up. That's when I understood they wanted me to see this, to witness their triumph while I drowned in shame. The weeks that followed were the darkest of my life. I called my parents, desperate for support. My mother sighed, disappointed. "You need to move on, Rowan. Bitterness isn't attractive." My father echoed her sentiment. Holding grudges was beneath me. My friends stopped returning texts. Laurel had gotten to them first, spinning some narrative where I was the villain, the obstacle to her happiness. I spent my days sending resumes into the void and my nights in a cramped studio apartment that smelled like mildew, nursing cheap whiskey until oblivion came. The mirror showed a stranger, unshaven, hollow-eyed, defeated. I'd once been sharp and ambitious, someone people respected. Now I was invisible, erased by 2 people who decided I was disposable. The invitation sat on my counter, mocking me daily. Some nights I wanted to burn it. Other nights I wanted to show up and scream. But mostly, I just felt crushed by the weight of their betrayal and my own powerlessness. I was buying coffee at a corner shop when someone called my name. I turned to see Iris Callahan, a friend from college I hadn't spoken to in years. She worked in PR now, sharp and successful in her tailored suit. We grabbed a table, and I don't know why, but everything spilled out. The promotion theft, the affair, the firing, the invitation. Iris listened with growing fury, her eyes darkening. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Rowan, they publicly humiliated you. They want you to slink away quietly while they celebrate on your grave." She grabbed my hand. "But you're not going to disappear. If they humiliated you in front of everyone, that's exactly where you'll take it back. You're going to that party, and you're going to make them regret ever crossing you." Her words hit like lightning. I'd been wallowing in self-pity, but she was right. They'd made this public. I could make my response public too. The fire I thought had died suddenly roared back to life. Iris became my architect of reinvention. She dragged me to a barber who sculpted my hair into something modern and sharp. We hit boutiques where she picked out clothes that transformed me, tailored pants, fitted shirts, a charcoal blazer that made me look dangerous. She enrolled me in a speaking workshop where I learned to command rooms with my voice and presence. "Confidence isn't arrogance," the instructor said. "It's knowing your worth and refusing to apologize for it." I practiced in the mirror until I believed it. Iris coached me on body language, eye contact, and the subtle ways to dominate a conversation without aggression. I worked out every morning, channeling rage into physical power. My apartment became a war room. Notes, strategies, rehearsals. The old Rowan had been invisible because he'd tried to blend in, to be agreeable. The new Rowan would be unforgettable. I wasn't building a costume. I was forging armor. When I looked in the mirror now, I saw someone who could walk into that party and own it. While Iris handled my exterior, I rebuilt my professional life. I reached out to old contacts, pitched freelance projects, worked 18-hour days to prove I wasn't broken. Then lightning struck. I landed a contract with Huxley Industries, a multi-million-dollar client that had eluded Clyde for years. I'd remembered a conversation from months ago, a connection he'd dismissed. I followed up, pitched a custom strategy, and closed the deal in 3 weeks. Word spread fast. People who'd ghosted me suddenly wanted coffee meetings. My inbox flooded with opportunities. Within a month, I'd made more money than I had all last year. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The best part? Huxley Industries had ties to half the guests on that engagement party list. When I walked into the Marston estate, I wouldn't just be Rowan Vance, the guy they'd destroyed. I'd be Rowan Vance, the man who'd risen from the ashes and become someone they couldn't ignore. The power shift was intoxicating. 3 weeks before the party, Another envelope arrived. This one was cream-colored, the penmanship different. We noticed you haven't RSVP'd. We sincerely hope you'll attend. Your presence would mean so much. It was signed by Laurel, her handwriting looping and false. I laughed aloud. They knew I'd rebuilt myself. Word of my Huxley deal had reached them, and now they were nervous. They wanted to control the narrative, to keep me close where they could monitor me. Or maybe they genuinely thought I'd accepted my defeat and would attend to show there were no hard feelings. Either way, their anxiety was delicious. I didn't respond. Let them wonder. Let them sweat. Iris grinned when I showed her. They're scared of you now, she said. They should be. I tucked the invitation beside the first one. My attendance wouldn't be a courtesy. It would be a reckoning. And they'd invited me themselves, giving me permission to walk into their kingdom and burn it down from the inside. Iris and I spent hours rehearsing every moment of the party. You can't get angry, she warned. Anger makes you sloppy. You need to be ice, calm, controlled, devastating. We practiced conversations, her playing different guests while I learned to deflect, charm, and subtly plant seeds of doubt. She taught me how to read a room, how to shift attention without shouting. Clyde will try to dominate, she said. Let him. Let him talk too much, too loudly. Desperation always sounds the same. We picked my suit together, midnight blue, perfectly tailored, understated but expensive. No flashy tie, no ostentatious watch. The goal wasn't to peacock, it was to emanate quiet power. When you walk in, don't scan for them, Iris instructed. Make them come to you. We role-played until my responses were automatic, until I could smile while delivering verbal daggers. On the eve of the party, Iris squeezed my shoulder. You're ready. Go make them remember why they should have never forgotten you. I spent weeks quietly gathering ammunition. I reached out to a former colleague who'd left Clyde's department disillusioned. He sent me files, budget reports Clyde had falsified, contracts he'd mishandled, emails showing he'd lied to the board. I contacted an investigator who confirmed Laurel's weekend trips to Charleston, trips she'd hidden from Clyde, meetings with an ex-boyfriend she'd never mentioned. Each piece of information was a bullet, and I loaded them carefully. I wasn't interested in wild accusations. Everything I had was documented, verifiable, devastating. I compiled it all into a slim leather folder that looked innocuous but contained enough truth to implode their carefully constructed facades. Some of the board members would be at the party, investors, partners, people with power. They deserved to know who they were celebrating. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being honest. They'd built their happiness on lies and theft. I was simply turning on the lights so everyone could see clearly. The night before the party, I stood in my apartment staring at my reflection. The man looking back was a stranger, sharp jaw, clear eyes, posture radiating controlled power. I'd transformed completely. The old Rowan, the one who'd been broken and discarded, was gone. In his place stood someone forged by betrayal and tempered by determination. I whispered to my reflection, tomorrow, they'll remember my name. I didn't sleep. I reviewed my files, rehearsed my lines, and visualized every moment. I imagined walking into that ballroom, the shock on their faces, the way the room would shift when I took control. Fear tried to creep in. What if I failed? What if I embarrassed myself further? But I crushed it. I'd already lost everything. There was nothing left to fear. Tomorrow wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about reclaiming the dignity they'd stolen. When dawn broke, I dressed slowly, deliberately, each piece of clothing a layer of armor. I was ready for war. The Marston estate glittered like a jewel against the evening sky. Chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors, and champagne flowed like water. Guests in designer gowns and tuxedos mingled, their laughter echoing off vaulted ceilings. I arrived exactly 30 minutes late, early enough to make an entrance, late enough to let them think I might not come. I handed my invitation to the attendant and stepped inside. The effect was immediate. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. I saw recognition flash across faces, followed by confusion and curiosity. Near the bar, Laurel froze mid-laugh, her champagne glass suspended halfway to her lips. Across the room, Clyde's face drained of color. I hadn't RSVP'd. I wasn't supposed to be here. But here I was, immaculate and unbothered, walking into their paradise like I owned it. I caught Iris as I neared the entrance. She'd arrived earlier, blending in. She gave me the subtlest nod. The game had begun, and I was already winning. I moved through the crowd like water, effortless and natural. People gravitated toward me, curious about the man they'd written off. I laughed easily, asked thoughtful questions, remembered names and details. Within 20 minutes, I'd charmed half the room. Clyde tried to intercept me, his smile strained. "Rowan, what a surprise," he said tightly. I shook his hand firmly, my expression pleasant. "Congratulations, Clyde. Beautiful venue." Then I turned to the investor beside him and launched into a conversation about the Huxley project, casually mentioning figures that made eyes widen. Clyde hovered awkwardly before retreating. I watched his frustration build as more guests orbited me, drawn by genuine charisma instead of forced networking. Laurel approached next, her smile brittle. "You look well," she said carefully. "I am well," I replied smoothly. Surprisingly liberating, actually. Her eyes narrowed, but I'd already moved on, leaving her standing alone. They'd been the stars of this night, but gravity was shifting, and they felt it. Clyde tapped his champagne glass, commanding attention for the traditional toast. The crowd quieted, turning toward the couple standing beneath an arch of white roses. Clyde launched into a polished speech about love and destiny, his voice dripping with false humility. Laurel gazed at him adoringly, playing her part perfectly. The guests smiled indulgently, but I noticed the cracks. How Clyde's smile didn't reach his eyes when he looked at me, how Laurel's hand trembled slightly on her glass. I stood near the back, my posture relaxed, my own champagne glass held loosely. When Clyde finished his rehearsed lines, people began to raise their glasses. That's when I lifted mine, not in agreement, but in challenge. The movement was subtle, but strategic. I shifted toward me, curious. Clyde's smile faltered. The room held its breath, sensing something unspoken crackling in the air. I didn't speak yet, just held his gaze, my expression unreadable, letting tension build like a gathering storm. Then I spoke, my voice carrying effortlessly across the ballroom. "To partnerships," I said smoothly. Funny thing about partnerships, though, sometimes the one actually doing the work gets cut out of the deal entirely. The silence was deafening. Every eye locked on me. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It's fascinating how credit works, isn't it? How success can be repackaged, claimed by someone with a better title and a louder voice. Clyde's face flushed red. "Rowan, this isn't the place," he started. I raised a hand, cutting him off gently but firmly. "Oh, but it's the perfect place. You invited me, after all, to celebrate your achievements." I let the word hang, loaded with implication. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Board members exchanged glances. People were listening now, really listening. Clyde tried to laugh it off, to steer back to his toast, but I'd already cracked his facade. The spotlight had shifted, and everyone sensed blood in the water. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the leather folder, setting it on the nearest table. "Since we're celebrating honesty and partnership," I continued conversationally, "I thought people might appreciate some transparency." I slid documents across the polished wood, budget reports with Clyde's signatures, emails showing falsified projections, contracts he'd deliberately sabotaged to hide his incompetence. Several board members moved closer, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock as they scanned the papers. "These are Clyde's financial reports from the last 2 years," I explained calmly. "Notice the discrepancies? The projects credited to him that mysteriously have my digital fingerprints all over the original files." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Investors began whispering urgently, pulling out phones. Clyde lunged forward, trying to grab the documents, but I'd already distributed copies to the key players. "That's slander," he sputtered. "Those are fabricated." A board member looked up coldly. "These have your signature, Clyde, and timestamps that tell a very different story than your reports." The room erupted in whispers. His empire was crumbling in real time. Then I turned to Laurel, whose face had gone ghostly pale. "And speaking of honesty," I said softly, though my voice carried perfectly, "should we discuss transparency in relationships too?" Her eyes widened in panic. I produced another set of papers, receipts from Charleston hotels, timestamps that contradicted her supposed work trips, photos that needed no explanation. "While your fiancé was closing deals and stealing credit, you were apparently rekindling old flames. Tell me, Laurel, does Clyde know about your weekends with Nathan?" The color drained from Clyde's face as he snatched the evidence. his hands shaking as he read. Laurel's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "That's not. You can't," she stammered. But the damage was done. Guests stared in stunned silence. The fairy tale engagement shattered into ugly pieces. The couple who'd seemed perfect, who'd built their happiness on my destruction, stood exposed as exactly what they were: liars, cheats, opportunists. I felt no triumph, only cold satisfaction. The truth needed light, and I provided it. Clyde's world unraveled with brutal efficiency. The board members didn't wait for explanations. They stormed toward the exit, phones pressed to their ears, already calling emergency meetings. Investors who'd been laughing with Clyde an hour ago now avoided eye contact. Their assessments of him fundamentally changed. I heard fragments of urgent conversations, breach of fiduciary duty, immediate audit, suspension pending investigation. Clyde chased after them desperately, his polished veneer completely shattered. "Wait, let me explain. This is a misunderstanding." But they brushed past him, their trust irreparably broken. His professional reputation, the thing he'd valued above all else, the prize he'd stolen my work to build, disintegrated in minutes. Security guards appeared, quietly asking him to step outside. The humiliation was complete and public, exactly as he'd intended for me. He'd wanted to celebrate his victory with everyone watching. Instead, everyone watched his downfall. As he was escorted out, his eyes found mine across the ballroom, filled with impotent rage and disbelief. I simply raised my glass in a mock toast. Laurel stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, the crowd giving her a wide berth like she carried a contagious disease. Her carefully constructed persona, the elegant fiancée, the respectable professional, had evaporated. She approached me, her composure finally cracking, fury and desperation warring on her face. "You vindictive piece of trash," she hissed. "You couldn't handle losing, so you destroyed everything." I looked at her calmly, my expression almost pitying. "I didn't destroy anything, Laurel. I just stopped covering for your lies." She raised her hand as if to slap me, but several guests gasped, and she lowered it, aware of the audience. I leaned in close, my voice soft enough that only she could hear. "You wanted the spotlight so badly. You were willing to betray someone who loved you. Well, congratulations, everyone's watching now. Enjoy it while it lasts, because once this news spreads tomorrow, you'll understand what it really means to lose everything." Her eyes glistened with tears, whether from rage or shame, I didn't care. She'd made her choices. Now she'd live with the consequences, just as I'd had to. That's when Iris stepped forward from where she'd been observing near the champagne fountain. She moved beside me, her expression professionally pleasant, but her eyes sharp. "Oh, I should mention," she said conversationally to the remaining guests, "I've been speaking with several journalists tonight. They were already here covering the event. Society pages love a good engagement party." She smiled. "Funny thing is, they're much more interested now. By tomorrow morning, this story won't just be whispered gossip. It'll be headlines." Laurel's face crumbled. Clyde, who'd returned trying to salvage something, anything, paled further. This wasn't just social embarrassment. This was a career-ending public scandal. Iris continued. "Of course, I gave them the full story. The stolen work, the affair, the documents. Everything is properly verified and fact-checked. Ethical journalism and all that." She glanced at me, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. I'd wanted justice. She'd ensured it would be thorough and permanent. The couple who'd tried to erase me would now be defined by this moment forever. The strangest thing happened next. Someone started clapping. It was slow at first. One of the junior executives from my old department, someone Clyde had also mistreated. Then another joined, and another. Within moments, applause rippled through the ballroom, not for the happy couple, but for me. People who'd witnessed the whole spectacle were actually applauding my exposure of the truth. Some looked uncomfortable, others vindicated, but they clapped. An older board member approached me, extending his hand. "That took courage," he said quietly. "We should have seen through him sooner." Others followed, former colleagues apologizing for their silence, acquaintances admitting they'd suspected something was wrong. I hadn't just defended myself. I'd given voice to everyone Clyde had steamrolled on his climb up. The applause wasn't celebration, it was recognition. Recognition that sometimes people need to see corruption exposed before they'll acknowledge it existed. I stood at the center of the Marston estate, the room I was never supposed to command, and accepted their acknowledgement with quiet dignity. This hadn't been about showmanship. It was about the truth. I walked out of the Marston estate into the cool night air, leaving the chaos behind me. The valet brought my car around, and I tipped him generously, feeling lighter than I had in months. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. The glittering estate growing smaller, the place where Clyde and Laurel's dreams had died and mine had been reborn. I'd lost my job, my fiancée, my reputation. They'd taken everything from me and laughed while doing it. But in one evening, I'd taken something far more valuable: their power, their carefully crafted illusions, the future they'd stolen while standing on my back. They'd wanted me broken and forgotten. Instead, I'd made myself unforgettable. The next morning, Iris texted me screenshots of headlines. Executive caught in fraud scandal. Engagement party turns into public confession. My phone rang with opportunities, job offers, interview requests, former friends suddenly remembering my number. But I felt calm. I'd already won. Not because I'd destroyed them, but because I'd reclaimed myself. I stole the room that night. But more than that, I stole back my life. If you made it to the end of this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button if you haven't already, and if you enjoyed this journey. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Rowan's revenge. Should he have done it? What would you have done? Let's talk about it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.